And welcome to our webinar, which today is all about how governments are using data to deliver for their citizens. I'm Siobhan Bonita, I'm a former UK civil servant, and I'm delighted to be chairing this webinar on behalf of Global Government Forum, which is the publishing house that serves civil servants all around the world, and with our knowledge partners today, Visa and Kearney. As I said a moment ago, we are translating this webinar into Spanish and Portuguese. If you would like to listen in either of those languages, please click on the interpretation icon and then you can select the language that you would prefer. So in terms of today's topic, data is integral to the work of governments all around the world in the 21st century, and administrations are using data from a range of sources, including anonymized and aggregated payments information to help deliver better services for citizens and for businesses. Now, in this webinar, we're going to share some insights from really current research, as well as examples from 3 different countries on how officials are using data insights to better understand trends and deliver better results in a range of policy areas. With our expert panel, and I will introduce them in a moment, we'll discuss how governments are unlocking the power of data to improve services, and we'll also consider some of the challenges that governments need to overcome to realise all of the opportunities that using that data can bring. Our expert panel will discuss all of those issues, as I said, but this is also your opportunity in this webinar to put your questions to our speakers. So on whichever device you are using, you should see somewhere a Q&A function. Please use that function at any point from now on to message in any questions that you have, and we will get through as many of those questions as we can by the end of the webinar. So in terms of our fantastic panel today, first we will hear from Tulsi Parida, who is the Director of Global Government Data Solutions at Visa. Tulsi develops innovative data solutions for governments looking to use spend insights in particular to inform their policymaking and decisions. She brings a decade of experience at the intersection of tech, society and business. And prior to Visa, she led teams at various startups working to bridge digital divides in literacy education, both in the US and in India. Then we will hear from Daniela Chikova, who is partner and managing director at Kearney. With over 20 years of consulting and industry experience, Daniela is an expert in banking with a focus on growth strategies, proposition design, and product monetization. During her career with Kearney, Daniela has worked in the United States, the UK, and many countries across Central and Eastern Europe. Then we will hear from Trond Hovland, who has been the CEO for Norway's Intelligent Transportation System since 2009. And is also the project lead for the Nordic Open Mobility and Digitalization Programme. Before that, Trond worked for almost 18 years for the Norwegian Public Roads Administration, holding several management positions and heading large ICT procurement projects in the road and traffic data sector. He works hard to establish national structures for information exchange for a seamless transportation service. Then we head over to the United States, where we will hear from Oliver Wise, who is the Chief Data Officer at the United States Department of Commerce. In this position, Oliver is responsible for leading the Commerce Department's data strategy, advancing capacity for evidence-based decision-making by implementing the Evidence Act and aligning and scaling the department's data resources to better meet the needs of users. Oliver was the founding director of the award-winning City of New Orleans Office of Performance and Accountability, which was the city's first data analytics and performance management team. And then last, but by no means least, we will hear from Andrew Banks, who is one of the lead data scientists at the Office for National Statistics here in the United Kingdom. He's responsible for leading research and data science projects with a particular focus on improving subnational statistics. Andrew joined the civil service as an economist in the Treasury, and he's worked on a range of topics at the ONS, including economic analysis, statistics production, data science, and data engineering. And a particular thank you to Andrew because he stepped in for his colleague at the last minute to do this because his colleague has recently had a baby. So thanks so much, Andrew, for that. As I said, if you would like to listen in Spanish or Portuguese, please use the interpretation button, and please do send in your questions at any point while you are listening to our speakers. But now I'm going to invite Tulsi to give us her opening remarks. Over to you, Tulsi.
Thanks, Siobhan, for the introduction, and thanks to everybody who's dialed in from around the world. So I am really excited to dive a little bit deeper into this discussion on the use of data and how governments can use insights gleaned from this data to make and deliver better services to citizens. So I'm Tulsi, and I am a part of the Visa team in our government solutions practice. I imagine that there are quite a few of you in this webinar who've heard of Visa, but you may not know exactly what we do. So at Visa, we're a trusted network, and we're a world leader in digital payments. And simply put, we enable money movement globally. So if you used a contactless payment to buy a bus ticket, or you found a store in another country and you bought clothes online using your card, or you paid a bill, it's Visa's network and technology that enabled your payment to go through and allows you to pay and be paid safely and securely. So how does that tie into government and data? So our network, Visa's network, we call it VisaNet, processes 200 billion plus transactions per year. So that's a lot of information or data that's flowing through our network, and that's $11.6 trillion in annual payments volumes across over 200 countries and territories. And we use our AI tools to mitigate risk and do fraud detection, and our intensive cybersecurity practices to prevent $26 billion in fraud every year. And this information that we see flowing through our network, when we do that using responsible data sharing practices and ensure that the data is depersonalized, de-identified, anonymized, and or aggregated, those insights have helped us build up a global expertise with localized market insights. And we've been able to use that payments expertise, as well as we have folks in our team who've been embedded in government and worked in government before. Using that government expertise, we've been able to provide payment solutions and associated value-added services to government clients over the past 60 years. So as part of our government solutions team at Visa, we're really trying to figure out how we can help governments and public sector answer their most pressing questions. And we can do that because of our global reach. So I mentioned over 200 plus countries. We're able to take learnings from best practices around the world and are able to scale up our interoperable solutions for governments in order for them to reach all of their citizens. And the kinds of questions that we're helping governments answer can be anything like, how do I protect the most vulnerable citizens in my country and ensure that they're receiving the aid that they need when they need it? Or how can I ensure that I'm funding critical policies by collecting tax and additional revenue from citizens while making sure that that process of collection is frictionless and easy? Or how can I ensure that there is visibility and transparency into spending public dollars? And then last but not least, and this is the topic of today's discussion, how do we ensure as a government that data is secure and that the insights that we get from that data can help us make meaningful policy decisions? And so to further explore that intersection with government and payments, we partnered with Kearney, and Daniela is on the call today, to publish a series of white papers that delved deeper into that intersection. And it was a really robust piece of work, and the Kearney team did 30 to 40 plus interviews, extensive desktop research on top of that. And we really wanted to document over the past 5 years or so, what have governments done in this space, and provide a forward-looking perspective as to what's to come at that intersection of data, specifically payments data, and government decision-making. And so our intention for this paper, or the series of papers, is that government and public sector can read these papers and find perhaps interesting case studies and best practices to choose from, of which there are many. So the papers published with Kearney cover a range of different topics. So there's one on disbursement programs, one on government commercial payments, digital enablement of small and medium-sized businesses, the rise of government digital platforms, and then lastly, the role of payments data in public policy. And so I'm not going to go into that paper because I'll leave Daniela to get into it, but we're really proud of the work that's come out of this and excited to dive into that discussion. So I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you so much, Tulsi. I'm really fascinated. I'm always fascinated when we hear from Visa, just to hear about that. I love the way you phrased it there. You've got that global reach, but with local insights, and how you can really help governments by kind of sharing your learnings from your own experiences. So just a few of the things you mentioned there, kind of reaching the most vulnerable citizens, reducing fraud, removing friction from transactions, making it more user-friendly, and then making those transactions as secure as possible. So all things that are really helpful for government as well. And then, as you say, which we'll hear more about now, that really topical issue of how governments can help improve their decision-making by using the insights from, in this case, in your case, the payments data. Thank you so much, Tulsi. Great place to start. And I'm sure it's already given our audience some food for thought for their questions. And now we'll hear from Daniela on what the research itself covered and what you found. Over to you, Daniela.
Thank you very much. Hello, everybody. Thank you, Tulsi, for the introduction of the white papers. I remember still our first conversation where you introduced the topic of using data and payments data in the public sector. And I thought, wow, this is really exciting. And this is an opportunity to explore a topic that is going to shape the future for the public sector. So what did we find? Of course, I cannot do justice of the white paper just in a few minutes, but I want to give you my personal highlights from about 4 months of research that we did jointly with Visa. Of course, data is something that everybody talks about, and there is a lot of data which is flowing every second through the cable lines under the Atlantic. But what is even more important is not the amount and magnitude of data, it is the value that data can create. Data has a potential to significantly increase GDP across countries. Studies are showing that public sector data, when shared in a proper way and when used in a proper way, can boost GDP up to 1.5%. And whenever combined with private sector data, it can boost GDP up to 2.5%. Actually, fairly recently, the European Commission published a study which found that the data economy in Europe, this means all economic activities which in some way use data, rely on data, or touch data, are generating already 400 billion in Europe. This is a substantial amount. So data is all around us, but payments data is a little bit different. There are certain unique features of payments data, and I want to spend just a minute talking about that before we go into some of the interesting case studies. Payments data is accessible. This means there is no need to build different infrastructure or develop technology in order to access payments data. It is out there and it can be available at any time. It is accurate because it is actual behavior of individuals or businesses. It is not intentions, and it is not self-reporting of what one's behavior was. It is timely because it is generated real time and can be used shortly after. It can be very granular. We will talk about the topic of protecting personal data, which is extremely important to enable the use of data. But at the same time, it is important to say that payments data can be aggregated on the level of a country, or it can be broken down at the level of a zip code or particular street in a city. It can cover the entire population, or it can cover the segment of young people between 18 and 20. There are so many different cuts which data can enable that it provides an opportunity for a lot of different analysis. And at the end, I've already said it, but I think that's the most compelling and beautiful thing about payments data. It has a very significant economic value. Unlike any other data, it is showing how much consumers spend, where they buy, what they buy, what is their preferred time of going to the stores. And this can generate insights which are valuable both for the public sector and also for businesses. We led a lot of interviews with public sector officials in preparation of this study. And during the interviews, three segments or three sectors emerged as very important and as sectors which are probably to some extent leading the way of using payments data for the benefit of citizens. Those were travel and tourism as first. The second one was urban planning and sustainability. And the third one was macroeconomic foresight. And let me just spend just a few minutes telling you about each one of those. The travel and tourism sector was significantly hit by the COVID pandemic. And the question about how to recover and where it goes with the recovery was a significant one for a lot of countries and a lot of destinations. So payments data can help in this context with understanding the impact of the pandemic. A lot of countries were able to understand who are the tourists coming in, which are the tourists which are boosting the recovery, in order to understand how to act and how to attract new tourists. There is an opportunity to design new strategies for tourism by looking at payments data. For example, discover new segments which you can target. And one of my favorite examples is the example of Dubai, which actually started already pre-pandemic using payments data for the benefit of tourism. The Hello China initiative, which some of you, many of you might have heard, is designing packages, tourism packages for Chinese tourists coming to Dubai. Those packages are including services like places where to eat, places to visit, concierge services, or wellness services, which Chinese tourists prefer. And it is creating something so tailored that Dubai managed to increase the spend of Chinese tourists by 50%. And just before the COVID pandemic hit, there were 300,000 Chinese tourists coming to Dubai every quarter. Moving to the next topic of urban planning and sustainability. Payments data can play a significant role here as well. And I'm very excited to hear about one of our panelists about the way he has used data in his daily activities. However, payments data here can be used on one side to improve the movement of individuals in the cities, to improve public transportation, improve the routes, improve the movement of people at peak times. And at the same time, it can help the cities test and understand the economic impact of different urban planning initiatives. For example, bicycle lanes, which have been controversial in a number of countries. Maybe we'll have the chance to tell you about the New York City Department of Transportation, which experimented with exactly bicycle lanes and found that they can double the revenues of those streets, which are able to introduce bicycle lanes and to maintain them for a certain period of time. And last topic about macroeconomic foresight. There is a part of macroeconomy which has been evolving in the last years. It is nowcasting. Nowcasting means that alternative data sources, which are more real-time than traditional statistics, are used as an alternative or as an addition in order to enhance the traditional statistics. Why is that needed? Typically, if you would like to understand GDP or consumer spending, you would get the official statistics 4 to 6 weeks after the end of the quarter. And if you would want to do a breakdown on a city or regional level, this would require maybe additional time until this data is available. And sometimes the granularity is not what is needed in order to have a robust analysis. So data like payments data, for example, can provide such economic insights as an add-on to official statistics. And a lot of banks already, the US Fed, the Bank of England, the ECB, the Bank of Japan, the Bank of Israel, are doing experimental time series, experimental statistics, where in a very structured way, payments data is used in order to forecast certain economic variables. And there are also structured ways to compare with official statistics to understand the differences and to improve and enhance the use of payments data for that. The beauty is, as I said, more statistics which are available quicker to enable a better decision making. As one of the officials that we spoke to mentioned during our conversation, the real-time data and the opportunity to use alternative sources enables agility in decision making, which is fantastic, because you're not looking in the rear view mirror in order to make decisions today. You're using today's data in order to be fit for tomorrow.
Thank you so much, Daniela. I mean, really fascinating. I really like the way you phrase it. There's loads and loads of data out there, but you need to find where the value is. Really good to have those real use cases, those examples, just showing the range of policy areas as well, as you say, travel, tourism, urban planning, sustainability in particular. And then that phrase, which some people may be familiar with, but some not, the nowcasting, and how that's using this real-time kind of information, real-time data to supplement some of those more traditional methods been used. Thank you so much. Really interesting to have those first two presentations. And now we're going to go over to our first speaker from one of our national governments. So Trond, we're coming over to you.
Thank you so much for the intro, and also for the audience that has dialed in and invitation. So I want to speak a little bit about data from a specific kind of perspective, like the climate perspective, because you mentioned also Nomad, the project that I'm running in the Nordic between the Nordic countries. So ITS Norway help governments in the Nordics to be aware of the data they have, and that is a really important task, and it's even more important than we thought when we started out. Even though the mobility and the transportation sector, they know every inch of their infrastructure, because they have to maintain it, they have to operate it, they have to do the traffic management of it. So they have a lot of data on it. Also, to a large extent, they know how it's used. They know the traffic volumes, the number of cars, the number of passengers, the number of kind of tons that is moved over the infrastructure. This is road, rail, air, and sea equally. But they find that sharing this data is really difficult. Even within the agencies, it's difficult to share these data. So a tremendous amount of value is lost because you can't share. So if you go to the next slide, please. So because of the climate shift, sharing is not, you have to do it, because even if you find it hard, it's going to be a change within the data community in the transportation and mobility sector. Because if you want to lower the emission of gases, you have to create seamless integrated mobility operations. You also have to create digital services where you usually have manual ones. So there is a lot of things going on behind the scenes that are difficult for us. But now the EU has kind of said that it will be carbon neutral by 2050. This means a reduction of emission of 55% before 2030. A quarter of that is transportation-related emissions. And 70% of that, again, is road sector emission. So if governments and cities want to focus on how to make cities attractive again and to make them livable again, they have to focus on the road transport in the city and between cities. So if you shift to the next slide, thank you. So on your right-hand side here, you can see all scheduled transportation services in the Nordics, kind of lined up in one map. And this data is available actually for all the EU members. Maybe not this year, but it will be eventually, because it's a kind of a regulation forcing us to use this kind of maps to portray all transportation issues that we have. Sorry, scheduled transportation routes. And on the left side, you see a more normal heat map of how to move around between and in cities in the larger regions of the Nordics. These data sets makes a tremendous good basis for digitalization, and sharing plays an important role here. In order to kind of transform the sector into a more sustainable one, you need to integrate transportation modes like buses and taxis and trains. You have to optimize the use of it. You have to fill it up. You cannot have half empty cars running around. You have to automate a lot of it. So you will see in the future automated vehicles, and also automated terminals and harbors and stations and stuff like that. And you need all that to reduce the cars and the need for more infrastructure. So it is kind of paramount that we fix this. So if you move to the next slide, I can tell you a little bit about what kind of data sets that we are working with in the Nomad project. First of all, I mentioned the map on the right side of my previous slide. It comes out of an EU regulation called the National Access Points, where every kind of scheduled service is to be recorded in one place. That is, of course, not enough, but at least it gives you the skeleton of where you can travel anytime in the Nordics. And as I said, also due for most of Europe. And then we buy access to telecom data, which is from home to work and from home to vacation and wherever, much more accurate data, but they are kind of individualized. And then we try to use back office data from taxi companies, carpooling companies, rentals and e-scooter companies to make sure that we have all the data that we need or how these are used and try to blend it into the one above. And then we monitor on a personal level how you buy tickets and where you are validating and where you're validating if you leave the vehicle. We are using the back system of the traveling apps. We are doing surveys, calls, interviews, online schematics. We are doing everything we can, even counting passengers manually if we need to. In a little bit into the future, we will also use counting devices that kind of automatically and with AI maybe measure all the traffic volumes a little bit more intelligent than we do today. We have connected cars, we have in-cars equipment, and maybe in the future we can also get access to toll road data, and maybe also we can get access to Visa to help us fill the gaps. So if you move to the next slide. All of these data are combined is a goldmine for governments and cities. If you integrate and use this data in an optimized way, you can actually integrate and optimize the real traffic. You can also make automatization much easier, and you can also use the data to plan ahead. So to kickstart the tourist industry after the pandemic, that will be fairly easy because we have the facts and we know the sector intimately. And also to deliver insights on how to help the government kind of place cities and working residential area in the right place is also in the data. So in the future, we will be able to use this data in a little bit more efficient than we do today, thanks to the vast amount of data and maybe the willingness to share in the future. So I think I stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. I'm sure people will have picked up on, as I did, that you said the Nomad problem, part of its objective is to help officials to become aware of the data that is available. And as you said, there's a lot of data out there, but it's difficult to share and not always being used. So losing a lot of value. And I think we'll come back to that in questions about why that's the case. What are some of the challenges there and how can you help raise awareness as well? But I really like, because I think you've kind of built a lot on what Daniela said about how you're using those different sources of data in the kind of mobility and transport areas, but you're also linking it to sustainability and to reaching those emissions reduction goals. And your key message there, I think, was we have to do this if we're going to make our transport system more sustainable. It's not a nice to have, it's an absolute necessity. Thank you so much, John. Fascinating there from you. And a reminder to our audience, we have 2 more presentations and then we will go over to questions. So please do get your questions coming in. But now, Oliver, we're coming over to you in the States.
Great. Thanks, Siobhan, and thanks for organizing this really interesting panel. So I'm Oliver Wise. I'm Chief Data Officer at the Department of Commerce in the United States here. The mission of the Department of Commerce is to create the conditions for economic growth and opportunity for all communities. But that's just our tagline, because we actually do a lot of different things. And it's we have some of our country's leading statistical offices. So we can have the census under our wing. We have the Bureau of Economic Analysis, which calculates gross domestic product. We do a whole lot of science. So the National Oceans and Atmospheric Administration, which is really one of the world's leading climate data organizations, is housed within the Department of Commerce. We permit and regulate particular industries like the commercial fishing sector and radio waves and spectrum. We also and permits and patents and trademarks. And then we also do law enforcement too. We enforce the country's export controls, which is a particularly topical area with the launch of the CHIPS Act and the export controls on China to their semiconductor industry. So it's a really interesting organization that does a lot and has a huge amount of data, either as a matter of that's what they do, like Census and NOAA are largely data collecting and publishing agencies, or we collect data as a result of the services that we provide. I should also say we're a major grant giving organization, and we're indeed have a $50 billion portfolio to connect all Americans to broadband internet. So as Chief Data Officer, my role is to help scale the value from all that data and to align all of that data to achieve the mission of the organization. And it's a really exciting and often humbling job, and I'm very excited to be here. I also lead the department's data governance activities and data strategy activities. And I wanted to talk about the work we're doing on commercial data, because I think that's topical to what Tran and Tulsi and Daniela discussed. So I view the world of data, like, let's imagine a quadrant where you have on your columns, there's public and private sources of data. And then on the y-axis, you have public and private use of data, right? So the public data for public use, I think is something that we've been doing now for a long time, probably 20, 30 years, probably a whole lot more than that, right? And I think that's a fairly mature sector. There's still a lot of room to grow there, but it's fairly well mature. And the industry that supports that area, I get calls from all the time. So it's a saturated market. Then there's public data for private use, which is also fairly mature, but I think there's some really exciting opportunities now with the development of generative AI. And we're spending a lot of time at Commerce thinking about how we maximize the benefits of those technologies while mitigating the very real downside risks. So that's an exciting frontier. But another one of those quadrants is the private data for public use, which I think is far less mature. It's probably the least mature of all those quadrants, and for which there's, I think, just an awful lot of room for growth. And I'm lucky enough at the Department of Commerce, because we do so many different things and have so many different functions, that you can really see the opportunities for private sector data in a lot of different domains. So in our statistical, the statistical side of the house, for example, Census has, and I think statistical organizations around the world, traditionally collect data through surveys, which was the pioneering innovation of the early 20th century. And what we're seeing is there's just far fewer people filling out those surveys. So in order to come up with more accurate, more timely estimates of economic and demographic activity, we have to look toward alternative sources of data, either administrative sources just being collected by another part of government, or from the private sector. And indeed, there's a lot of innovation at Census to use payments data from payroll companies, from alternative sources to create better estimates. We're seeing the use of private sector data also in our in NOAA, the Oceans and Atmospheric Administration, where we take advantage of partnerships with the private sector to get better measurements of ocean conditions from seagoing vessels who can collect data at really no marginal cost, but that can be very helpful for the scientific community and climatologists around the world. And in our supply chain and industrial policy side of the house, we really rely on private sector data to help us understand global trade flows, to understand the governance of businesses seeking export licenses. A lot of that data it can be very hard to know what companies are actually legitimate companies and which are just shell companies that are actually something that's a company that has ownership with an adversary. So it's an increasingly important part of the data stack that informs how we do supply chain and industrial policy in a more proactive way.
Oliver, thank you so much. I mean, when you set out what your department does, the Department of Commerce, I'm in awe just of the actual kind of scale of kind of your remit there, and to be the CDO for that must be quite a daunting task, I should imagine. But just covering all of that, and also I love the way you set out there that quadrant of kind of the different types of data, everything from public data for public use, which, as you say, is kind of a well-known kind of got a lot of experience in that area, right up to more what we're talking about today, the private data for public use. And you've set out there 3 really nice examples of where governments are already thinking about how they can use some of that private data and some of those huge opportunities, as you said there, to help inform better government decision making by using that private data in those areas. Thank you so much, Oliver, for giving us that perspective. And then, as I said, last but by no means least, Andrew, we will come over to you, where I think you also have quite a vast scale of data. It's everything that you do. Over to you.
Yeah, hope you can hear me okay.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Andrew.
So yeah, really pleased to be speaking today. My name is Andy Banks, lead data scientist at the Data Science Campus, which is a part of the Office for National Statistics, which is the UK's National Statistics Institute, so the UK kind of version of the US Census Bureau. And the Data Science Campus was launched 6 years ago now, based off an official review by Sir Charles Bean, to basically see if new data and new technology can be used to improve official statistics and inform the kind of analysis that is being undertaken in government. So we've grown in that 6-year period from about 5 data scientists to just around 100 people now, comprising a mix of data scientists, lecturers, and teams supporting the delivery of the work. And the core mission we have is in the campus is data science for the public good, and that involves utilizing new data, but also new technology and new algorithms to really achieve that mission. And there's a couple of sort of elements to that which are really important. I think first is kind of using new data and new technology to produce actionable insights. So we know from the pandemic and the response to that there was a real need for policy to really quickly and rapidly adapt, and with that came a real demand for new data, new, more granular, more timely, insightful data to be available really quickly. And with that, following that, there's that kind of expectation has continued. So that there's still that real need for greater evidence and insight applied to now a whole range of other kind of topics at a pace which is really quite fast. The second element is to produce better statistics. So Oliver mentioned about traditional survey sources being used to produce kind of regular, timely, and frequent statistics that many of us critically rely on in terms of core products like the census, like GDP statistics, inflation statistics. But again, there's a real need for those data to be more timely, more granular, more targeted. There's some real key emerging themes in terms of the need to produce bespoke geographies. So it's not just available on sort of standard geographic breakdowns, but the ability to really go at a really fine level and look not just at electoral wards or kind of other such geography, but to actually, you know, be able to almost draw your own kind of area and be able to see statistics and insights on that kind of level. And there's a real amazing potential for new data, both kind of commercial and administrative data to be made available. And as Oliver said, that kind of private data for public use is a really a new kind of growth area, and with some interesting potential. And you know, a couple of examples, you know, obviously financial transactions data has been sort of mentioned, but other data sources might include, you know, mobility data to inform population estimates and things like that. Another area that we're really we are getting involved in is building capability across the public sector. So with the kind of opportunities that have come with new data and new technology, there's a kind of an explosion of new teams that are getting embedded, new data science teams and data engineering teams that are getting embedded in the public sector, from local government, you know, all the way up to the main Whitehall government departments. And there's a real need for improving data literacy and advanced programming and other techniques to be there in the public sector, and that's a role we have a part in. And also improving efficiency as well. So you know, that both in terms of improving the use of kind of code and data engineering principles and best practice, making that more widely available and rolled out across the public sector, but also the huge potential for data and algorithms to improve operational delivery, and the benefits from that is potentially really substantial. So really keen to talk about some of the challenges. But I thought I'd just give a very brief example of the potential prize that you can kind of get when you get this right. And so an example that of some work which we did with the with other teams in the Office for National Statistics was to look at the how the price of the cheapest items in supermarkets has changed, and to sort of set the scene in mid 2021. Everyone will be very aware that the price of groceries increased incredibly sharply, with food prices rising at the fastest rate in over a decade. But there was the existing statistics that we produced really only gave a sense of what was happening to average prices in that kind of basket of goods, and there was a real call to see how the very cheapest prices of goods were changing, and as I mentioned right at the start, the expectation there is to, you know, be able to produce some really actionable insights there quickly. So what we did was we looked at we gathered millions of price quotes from 7 retailers in the UK covering 30 core products. And we use that to then assess the cheapest price, and also the difference between the very cheapest and the next cheapest item, to have a look at the degree to which people were able to substitute if the cheapest price wasn't available. And we produced some regular statistics from that in a turnaround of just a matter of months, really kind of meeting the need for that to fill that kind of evidence gap really quickly with a new data source that the existing data just wouldn't support. You know, and as a result, that was a kind of an insight which the public and policymakers were able to gain really quickly. You know, from making better use of new data to get those insights out. So it can be done. It can be done really quickly, and the real benefits to the public are absolutely there. So that's it from me.
Thank you so much, Andrew. My screen has frozen, so I hope you can all hear me. Raquel, maybe you
Yeah,
can.
we can.
Brilliant, thank you. So Andrew, thank you so much for that. I mean, great to hear what the Data Science Campus do and why you were established. Interesting as well, I think others will certainly be familiar with, as you say, the pandemic driving up that appetite for real-time data and the legacy of that remaining now, and people wanting increasingly kind of granular and real-time, up-to-date targeted statistics. And then that example that you give there at the end of the kind of food prices of the kind of economy ranges and the cheaper food items really did hit the headlines here in the UK. So that really did make an impact and was incredibly important for a lot of people. So thank you so much to everybody for our opening presentations. I do want to kick off because I think one of the things that you all touched on, I think in different ways, was this sense of there being lots and lots of data out there, a wealth of data, but actually you have to understand that data and understand where you can gain the insights from that, what's the most valuable parts of that data. So my question to all of you is, how do we help policymakers to do this? And there might be people on the in the audience who aren't data specialists. This is not their area of expertise, but they're policymakers who want to use this data in the best possible way. So how do we help policy officials really understand which data they should be looking at? Because not all data is equal, I imagine. Tulsi, we haven't heard from you for a while. I'm going to come to you first.
Sure. It's been fascinating hearing everybody's examples of the incredible work that they've been doing on this panel. And I think, yeah, there's a couple points that I want to make with this question. One is, you know, there is absolutely a lot more data today out there than there was before. But I think where that data can be valuable, not just for public officials and private sector, but for individual citizens, we need to make sure that data collection is also underpinned by principles of consent and consumer empowerment, right? So when you're collecting data, it needs to be and Visa uses this approach is creating a framework where it's an empowerment first principle, and citizens and consumers that are using, for example, Visa products and services have an understanding of what data is being collected about them and have control over if they want to change that down the line. And that, I think, is paramount, because otherwise what you end up having is a lot of data noise, and you have companies or entities that are collecting data on every single data point, and that might not actually be necessary. So it's really important to have a purpose and to have the citizen or the consumer at the heart of that kind of that decision of whether that data should be or shouldn't be collected. So I think that's first. And then when you're coming to then decide what kinds of sources are useful, I think it's I really like the examples that Trond provided on the vast range of data sources, whether it's telecom or, you know, from the transit providers. It's important to think laterally, and we see this at Visa as well, right? Is that you might not think of Visa as a payments company, but you might not think that we have insights that would be useful for, say, travel and tourism. And the important factor here is that our data alone is not going to help solve for a problem or solve for a challenge. Instead, our data combined with, say, insights from telecom, insights from government sources and surveys can provide that bigger picture. So when it comes to figuring out which data sources are most useful, when we've worked with government clients, the first thing we ask is, you know, what are the challenges or problems that you're trying to solve for? Let's figure out that problem statement. The answer might actually be that you don't need transaction data at all to help answer that question, right? And so starting with that challenge and that problem statement, and then going into, okay, what might be the sources that could help me arrive at an answer? And of course, making sure that any form of data collection is centered around the citizen or the consumer that you're getting that data from.
Thanks, Tulsi. I want to pick up on in a moment that issue of trust and consent, because I think that's a kind of, that merits a kind of question on its own. But you mentioned Trond's example, and it was Trond yourself who did talk about your objective as being raising awareness of the data that's available. So I want to put this same question to you, Trond, around how do we help officials understand not just what data is available, but how they can best use it and where, which types of data sources they should be using?
Thank you for that question. It's really a hard one. But to make the officials and also the private entities aware of the data and the source of data that might be needed to solve the climate crisis, one thing, but also to grow businesses and to scale better, is like a riddle to us at the moment. But we need to kind of look at the purposes of or maybe the means to what the data can help us achieve. I don't know if that kind of made sense, but anyway, you have these climate goals, and you also have the need to scale businesses. Both can be achieved by innovating and using new sources of data, and to do that, we try to list data like we did in my presentation for the officials, and then we of course do much more detailed work. We try to find ways for them to see the value of the data. And that is not difficult, but once they see the kind of the goal that is in the data, they also immediately become aware of the difficulties by gaining those data, because that might be personal data that is not for sale. That might be GDPR questions around those data. There might be trust issues like we have been speaking about. For instance, to get access to taxi data, which kind of trips is most used by a taxi company. If they share that with the public, they might put in a bus service there, and then you lose the revenue from that kind of stream of income. And that also goes if you plan two types of taxi companies on the same platform, they will compete with the same customer base.
Yeah.
So you have to make them aware of the goal, but still you have to also learn how to make trusted environments in where it's safe for the companies to share data, and also the value of sharing has to become much more apparent.
Yeah, thanks, Trond. I am going to ask, because I think there's a lot in there to unpack, so I'm going to put the same question to Daniela and then to Oliver and then to Andrew. This question about how do we help officials understand kind of the best sources of data, but also I think what Tulsi and Trond have raised there are those issues around trust and also GDPR. Do you think some of the barriers to using data in the policymaking process is because officials are worried that they're going to do something, say break GDPR rules, for example, or break some other regulations, so they don't understand how they can use and share some of this data? Daniela, was this an issue that came up in your research?
I would actually want to start at a different place, because I found the last two comments very inspiring and very relevant. And I can just echo what was said a minute ago by Tulsi and Trond. There is a need for understanding the problem or understanding the purpose for which the data is used. I think the starting point is not which data should I use, or can I use the data that I have available? The starting point is, what am I trying to solve, and what impact is that going to create for citizens and for society? This is where we started actually with the series of white papers. We asked ourselves this question, and the approach that we selected is to say, we want to provide inspiration. We want to give examples, not of the types of data, but of how the public sector has used this data in order to create benefits. And I've mentioned a few of those, but there are really a lot very inspiring examples beyond Dubai and the New York Department of Transportation. We have seen how, for example, Mexico City is digitalizing the payments within their public transportation and using payments data in order to understand who are those vulnerable in society and provide subsidies to these individuals. We talked also to Alvaro Ortiz, who is leading the big data research within BBVA, and we spoke with him about legs of official statistics and how important it is to have alternative data sources. He told us how he started in Turkey, because in Turkey, the lag in official statistics is tremendous. And after he got the positive feedback about producing or simulating statistics through payments data, he was able to replicate it in other countries. We have seen examples in Japan where cities collaborate between each other and use payments data in order to understand how they can attract tourists as a community, not as a standalone cities or standalone sightseeing sites. So I think the way to go about this is also very often to understand what has been done, what has the impact of those initiatives been, and then try to address a specific issue. I think GDPR is a topic, especially in the European context. However, I believe that the public sector, but also a lot of the companies have learned over the last years to deal with GDPR, understand the importance and also the value that it can create, and the importance of also upholding it towards individuals.
Thanks, Daniela. We do have a couple of questions coming in. So Oliver and Andrew, I'm going to ask you to keep your answers quite brief, but then I'm going to come to you both first on the next round of questions. So Oliver, you mentioned obviously the public use of private data was one of the least explored areas. So do you think part of that is because officials don't understand how they can do this?
No. It's just that I think it's an immature field, and the art of the possible hasn't really fully been played out yet. But I don't think it's government decision makers are the barrier here. I think it's just an immature field. So I think this is a space that's ripe for philanthropy to lead the way, for corporate responsibility outfits to find innovative ways to share their data. And I think you saw that over the pandemic. I can think of examples of that. One particularly good example is the work the Gates Foundation did with Harvard University and Raj Chetty on the Economic Opportunity Tracker. I thought that was a really exciting innovation. But this is a new field. And I don't think like GDPR, and we don't have an equivalent in the United States, unfortunately. We have a much more fractured consumer privacy regulatory framework, but I don't think those should be seen as barriers that we need to find like creative ways around. It's like those laws are even more important when it's not just private sector data being used to, target underwear advertisements to you or some like innocuous retail item, but it's actually how government's going to deliver services. So like, I think consumer privacy is even more important in those with those use cases.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. So Andrew, final thoughts from you on this issue of how do you help government officials just understand where to get the most value out of the data that exists?
Yeah, I think it's been a really interesting discussion. I mean, just to echo a couple of points that people have said. I mean, Daniela's sort of rightly saying starting with the research question first, is critically important. Are you trying to repeat this analysis? Really honing in onto the detail of your research question just to understand exactly what data source might be best. I think all data has strengths and limitations, and you should think about in these kind of principles. Timeliness, frequency, granularity, so the ability to kind of hone in on detail in different areas, get that kind of daily frequency or hourly frequency versus a kind of annual frequency. And your research question informs that. So do you need, and on the other sense, there's kind of coverage and representativeness. So some of the data might be really, really timely and frequent, but actually it might not be particularly representative, or there might be some missing groups of the population that aren't covered in the data. And so I think it's being aware of both the opportunities and the potential limitations to using some data, which is important. And sometimes there's a trade-off between the two, and you have to kind of balance that trade-off to say, you know, do I really need my data to be really high timeliness and high frequency, or am I more concerned about making sure that 100% of the population is just absolutely captured, and I don't have to estimate or impute the kind of missing element. I think Tulsi was right in saying that there's not one source, not one single source that is right. It's kind of you know, bringing together, you know, potentially different data sets. Linking data is being able to link data is potentially really important. I think then the ethical side of things as well. So, you know, are you being open and transparent about how you want to be using the data? Do you have a kind of real strong justification for using particular data? Have you thought really carefully about how that data might be kind of stored, anonymized before linkage? And this kind of principle of only taking what you need, I think, is also really important. So you might have access to potentially a vast range of data, but your particular research question might only need you to take a subset, an anonymized subset or sample of that data. And so that is really important as well in being clear about what you need. And that is, again, really important in building trust in use. So those are some of the areas and principles I'd kind of point to.
Yeah, thanks, Andrew. Which brings up that question of trust again. I want to go over to the questions that have come in from the audience for the next round, and I think I'm going to take two of them together because I think they're related. So Carlos has said, some folks in academia further discuss how we should be thinking about data donation, documentation frameworks and governance system. So essentially, what do you think about data philanthropy, especially for research purposes? So is this something that can be used, relied upon, and data seen as a kind of global public good? So that was Carlos's question. And I want to link that to the question from Katie Corral, who said, what would it take to increase maturity? I think this was linking on what you said, Oliver, about this just being a less mature area, that public use of private data. Is contracting an issue? So as in the traditional vehicles for government buying data may need innovation. And also, is it the same issue when you're trying to share from state to state in a federal system? So I think these are two different ways about sharing data, data donations, and is there something around procurement that needs updating as well? And I said I was going to shake this out, so I'm going to go in reverse order. So Andrew, I'm going to come to you first. Your thoughts on that question?
So really interesting question on this idea of data for the public good and global good. I mean, I think I would say that you know, having as much open access to data as possible is incredibly important. So you know, there's been a huge increase in the amount of open data which is available, and that can only be a good thing. So, you know, fantastic innovations in, you know, and things going on in the open source community, things going on in you know, if you think about initiatives like OpenStreetMap or kind of crowdsourced open data. I think that's incredibly important. I think government's openness of data and statistics is also important. So ensuring that you know, as much as we store, collect, and produce in terms of statistics is made publicly available, and that's obviously a really important element for us. I mean, for the data science campus, our principle is that our code is made publicly available on GitHub. And we do that as much as it's possible to do so. So I think all of that, you know, lends itself to you know, it being a really important area. So I think the more that we can do in that space, the better. Obviously, there'll be lots of reasons, both kind of commercial and personal sensitivity, that mean that we can't you know, always make as much as possible open, as much as we can open. But yeah, that's something I would say. I think another thing is in the UK is that is going on is the Integrated Data Service, which is led by the Office for National Statistics. That's a kind of a new platform which is similar to the Secure Research Service, which is made available to kind of academia, where people can go in and access sensitive data under the right kind of protocols and things like that. So I think that's also a really important service to kind of maintain and make available to the academic community.
Thanks, Andrew. That was the Integrated Data Service, if people want to go and see that on the ONS site. Thank you. Oliver, so your thoughts. I think Katie's question was prompted by your response to the last question. So is there a procurement issue here that needs updating?
Absolutely there is. And we're finding, so we have a commercial data working group that we started here at Commerce, and kind of the first task is we have to procure data better than what we're doing now, because now we buy data the way we buy office furniture, which is bureau by bureau, silo by silo for bespoke use cases. And we don't do a great job of taking an enterprise-wide view of licensing private sector data so that we can really explore the different use cases for that data across the different bureaus rather than on a unit by unit basis. So I think there's certainly a lot that can be done in that space.
Yeah, thanks, Oliver. Trond, did you want to answer either the procurement issue or the one about should there be rethinking of kind of the flow of data governance arrangements for research purposes?
Well, I think I can just echo what Oliver said, at least for now. And I think I would like to answer a little bit differently, because like I'm coming from Norway, and Norway is maybe a communist country as seen from the outside, I don't know. But at least we have a strong regulation when it comes to sharing of data within the transportation sector. We are made like an entity in Norway that collects all transportation related data by law, has to be updated continuously and shared freely with anybody who wants to make a transport service or mobility service. So it's like a free ride. If you use those data, it's paid for, and you can actually make a business on top of it.
Right.
Still, when it comes to buying of data, I think we have a long way to go in Norway as well, because we need to buy a lot of data, and we need to set up agreements for instance, by Visa. If we want to dive into what Visa have, we need to get the data we need, not the full portfolio of what they have. So I think this is a really big question, and I choose to kind of answer shortly here, and then I can come back.
Thanks, Trond. I'm really conscious of the time. I can't believe how fast our time has gone. And there is another question that I want to get to. So Tulsi and Daniela, if you did want to answer kind of Carlos's or Katie's questions, you can do it in this final round. You can kind of reference it in this final round. But I do want to give you all an opportunity to answer the final question from Benedicta Arthur, who has said, how do you ensure that the data used to further the public good includes invisible or underrepresented populations? And I think all of you touched on this in some ways, but just how can we give some reassurance that data from private sources in particular will include invisible or underrepresented populations? Tulsi, I'll come to you, and then Daniela, and then I'll go to our other three speakers very quickly before we close. So Tulsi, to you first.
Thanks. I think it's a great question to end on because it's any innovation that comes out of the use of data has to be inclusive, both in terms of the representation of that data and then also the benefits that come out of it. So I think it's a fantastic question. I think there's maybe 3 points I have here. So one thing that private companies can do, and something that we really value at Visa is to ensure that there is real diversity in the teams that are working in the data science and AI functions, and not just that, but the company more broadly. But when you have people in the room who are making the decisions on what data to collect from where, how does that get input into a model? What is the bias that might be going into it? The more diversity of thought, perspective, background that you have in the room, the more likely you are to make sure that those practices are inclusive. So I think that's one thing really as a basic baseline that all private sector and public sector, to be quite frank, entities should be doing. The second is, I think, we talked about the importance of multiple sources of data. So we only see who uses Visa, data from when a Visa card is used. We don't see the whole world of transactions. So there's cash transactions, there's bank to bank, and then there's, and if we're only making decisions, if governments are only making decisions based on Visa data, for example, they're missing out a whole chunk of the economy. And that's where I think ensuring that you're using data sources that do capture those who are traditionally excluded. So survey data could be actually really useful in those instances. So making sure that you do that. And then lastly, if you do want to ensure that you're getting everyone, can you bring them into the fold, into the digital world by putting them first in communications and building that trust and getting them as a part of that formal sector to collect the data.
Thanks, Tulsi. I'm going to have to ask you all to keep your comments very tight because I'm conscious of the time. But just to say as well that Amal has also added to that question, I think it's very similar. How can government agencies use data collected to serve the most vulnerable and marginalized groups, especially women, and empower them economically? So, Daniela, your thoughts on diversity in about 1 minute, I'm afraid. Thanks.
I think very, very critical topic. And I have seen a number of examples which are really fascinating, especially in the disbursement area. Maybe something which we have not spoken about, but just to give you an example, Guatemala during the COVID pandemic used the electricity usage of households in order to understand who are the underrepresented ones and to provide them with state subsidies. On the other side, maybe in a country which is a bit more developed and is here within our footprint in Europe, Estonia is using a lot of different sources in order to understand who are the individuals who are who are vulnerable or marginalized, in order to actively go to them and proactively offer different types of support, make them aware of the different government subsidies and programs that they might be eligible for. I think there are a lot of ways in which data which is available can be used for the marginalized groups, but at the same time, of course, government needs to think how in a creative way they can collect also data and tap into sources which will give them more insight into those underrepresented populations.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Daniela. Trond, your thoughts on this issue of reaching the most vulnerable people, making sure data is used effectively for their purposes as well?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think it's really good. When it comes to mobility, you can face a situation where a woman is traveling alone in a subway car. We have that as a use case in one of our projects, where we see how you can kind of make your profile fit in with the other profiles that are actually traveling at the same time, and make sure that the woman is not alone in any given situation, and also at the stations and on the road to the station. So this is a topic that is really high on our agenda. So it's really good question. We have not solved it, but we are aware of the problem. Yeah.
Thanks, Trond. It's really clear already that from all the examples you're giving, kind of this kind of reaches across all of the policy areas. Oliver and then Andrew, your final thoughts. So Oliver, first you on this issue of reaching the most vulnerable through data.
Yeah, and I'm going to answer more of the first question more, but I think like looking 10, 20, 30 years ahead, I think a major role of national statistical agencies will be to normalize and mitigate the bias that's in private sector, comes from private sector sources, and then publish those as anonymized aggregated statistics for public use. So I think that shows it's a really important value that government can provide, and the government statistical community in particular can provide.
Thanks very much, Oliver. And Andrew, I'm going to come to you for the final words on this.
Yeah, I'd say just to pick up a couple of points on what people have said, which I agree with. I mean, inclusivity in the statistics is incredibly important. It's paramount, and it's essential for maintaining kind of public trust in official statistics. So it's something that is incredibly important. I think some of the answers are, as has been said, you potentially reaping some of the benefits of private sector data, as there may lower costs, and kind of almost investing that back into kind of oversampling or ensuring that you're capturing and representing parts of the population where that data isn't covered, because often surveys are expensive, and so if you can recycle some of that saving to oversampling kind of the population that isn't being captured, you could end up improving the representativeness and coverage there. I think then the prize is kind of greater granularity, where you can really look at what incomes incomes that people have, price changes that they're facing, these sorts of things. You can look at those in a lot more detail, and you can ultimately have better targeted support and also better monitoring to see whether policies have made an impact on the groups that you want to see greater outcomes in. So I don't think that this is incompatible. The greater use of private sector data is incompatible, but as Oliver said, there needs to be this shift to really ensure that that's done in the right way, so that you can ensure that people are counted, which is incredibly important.
Brilliant. Well, fantastic. Thank you so much, Andrew. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion. I think that point really captured it at the end there, that there are so many potential opportunities and benefits from the use of kind of private data, payment data, for example, but private data to help inform public policy. And it seems like this is an area where we're only just beginning, but it has to be done in the correct way. Thank you so much. We are sadly out of time. I just want to say thank you to the audience for sending in those great questions. We will have sent a questionnaire out to the audience. So if you've received that, please do take a couple of minutes to fill that in. It just means that we can continue giving you exactly the type of webinars that are most useful for you. I would like to say a huge thank you as well to our fantastic translators today for doing all of the translation behind the scenes. And of course, again, to Visa and to Kearney for being our knowledge partners, but most of all to our fantastic panel today. So thank you so much to Tulsi, to Daniela, to Trond, to Oliver, and to Andrew. Thank you so much for lending us your expertise and so much of your insight and time today. If you enjoyed this webinar, we will be sending you the link with the video. You can share it with your colleagues. You can watch it all again yourselves. We will also be sending a write-up of an article with the key points that were mentioned today that will come around in a week or so. And as you can see, we have lots of other webinars ahead. The next one there on your screens is the Responsive Government Survey, research conducted by Global Government Forum and others. So that's on the 9th of May. But if you go on our website as well, you can see other webinars that we have coming up. And please feel free to register for those as well. But thank you again to our brilliant panel. Thank you to everybody. Enjoy the rest of the day wherever you are. And I hope we see you again very soon. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye.